What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my most anticipated games for 2025. Now that we're past the Game Awards and all the big announcements for the year, and at this point all the releases really, it's time for me to start handling some administrative stuff, getting ready to honestly just pay my taxes and whatnot, but also that includes planning everything for next year, because doing all these 100% reviews and just reviews in general revolves a lot around time management and planning things in advance, so I do my best towards the beginning of the year to sort of map out what that looks like. And naturally, that begins with the games I am personally the most excited for. But naturally, just a couple of things to know at the beginning of the video. As far as I'm concerned, this is mostly about games that I think are likely to release in 2025 or already have release dates, because some stuff is slated for 2025, but we still know basically nothing about it, which naturally means it's very up in the air whether or not we actually see that. So a quick example there is Fable, or the reboot of the Fable franchise. That's supposed to be slated for 2025, but we hardly know anything about that at all. Nothing's been announced. They weren't at the Game Awards as an example. So it could really go either way, and thus, not only is it maybe not going to be in 2025 at all, it's hard to get particularly excited about it when I know not much of anything about it at all. So generally, I try to avoid stuff like that, and then it probably also goes without saying that some of these games might not actually wind up being any good, which is ultimately what the reviews are for. An example of that this year was actually Dragon's Dogma 2 for me. I was very excited for that game going into it, only to be let down pretty hard as a result. So ultimately, things will change. But for right now, towards the beginning or end of 2024 really, but also the beginning of 2025, these are what I'm looking forward to the most. Kicking it off nice and early with my most anticipated game this year, and this is actually Avowed, Obsidian's upcoming fantasy RPG set in their world of Eora. Now, I'm a big fan of that setting specifically because of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. Avowed shares a universe with those games. I'm a huge fan of what they did with them. They're carrying forth the lore. Avowed takes place about 3 or 4 years after Deadfire, which means we'll get some advancement of that plot. They're obviously bringing it to a new genre, essentially, though. And how well they manage to pull that off and what that feels like, I think, will ultimately be what decides its success or failure. Because personally, I love the CRPGs, but it's not really any secret Deadfire didn't sell particularly well. But at the same time, moving to that new genre risks leaving things behind that were important to the people who did play those games, but how much that matters has yet to be seen. And I discussed a fair bit of that and more in a preview I got to take part in. Some of you may know this already, but I actually got to play Avowed for quite some time back in November, where I shared a whole bunch of details about it in like a 40-minute video. And for the most part, I enjoyed it, though I certainly had a few concerns even there. But putting all of that aside, I'm just excited to jump into that world again and see what they do with it. I'm really partial to the lore of it specifically, which is why I'm looking forward to it. So I hope it manages to pull everything off. But either way, as it is out in February, we really don't have too much longer to wait on that one. Also releasing in February, a couple weeks earlier though, is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I would say my second most anticipated title for the year, actually. So Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has the opportunity to, I would say, fix up and address a lot of the shortcomings of the original game, because that game was a fantastic RPG in its own right, but had a lot of jank and just generally clunky systems that could be a bit annoying, let's say. Not least of which was how much of a letdown the ending of the story was, to be honest. So this game, continuing directly that story, has the chance to give it a satisfying conclusion while also revamping all of those systems that felt a little awkward, and maybe even expanding them while you're at it, which it seems like they're doing. We know we'll have access to primitive versions of guns and things, and thus far every preview they've shown of it seems particularly promising on exactly that front. So again, I'm hoping they manage to pull all that off, though it also appears they're putting a really big emphasis on the new city of Kuttenberg, or I should say Old City really, and how it acts as the place where money gets minted, and so there's a lot of power and wealth and status mixed up in that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. But for all of those reasons and more, I'm excited for this one. And I'm hoping it manages to live up to the lofty ambitions of the first title. That does bring us to our number 3 entry though, and this one is a bit different with Crimson Desert, a game that was announced quite a while back and has since seen multiple trailers and things like that. And honestly, in every single one of those, it has looked better every time. Though, ultimately, this game is going to be an open world action adventure. adventure. And the main reason I'm looking forward to it, truth be told, is just that it looks awesome. Tons of systems, large battles, flight mechanics. As action-adventure style games go, it looks fantastic. But obviously, that also comes with concerns about things like, a checklisty open world, or if it actually has any meaningful content, or just interesting things to get up to besides simply exploring and climbing towers and checking things off of lists. So whether or not it manages to move from something that looks really cool to something that actually is really cool and fun to play remains to be seen. And I think a lot of that is just going to come down to the depth of its world and how interesting exploration is. And that's to say nothing of the story, which, as far as we know, just follows a captain of the group known as the Greymanes, but with any luck they'll manage to pull all this together and make something really cool. But either way, looks super cool already, which is why I'm hoping it manages to actually be cool. But that does bring us to our fourth entry, something a little different with Bloodlines 2. So I'm a big fan of the World of Darkness. Bloodlines 1 is a fantastic game that's kind of grown its cult following over the past couple decades, and so naturally a sequel of any sort was going to be on my radar. Bloodlines 2 has had no shortage of development woes, I would say probably more so than just about any game I've seen actually, and yet in spite of those things, I simply have to know how this one turns out, and while it was delayed hopefully for the final time to the first half of 2025, this time it would appear that pretty much all they're doing is polishing the game, and given the rate of updates and stuff they've provided about it since that announcement, I'm inclined to believe them. But going off the most current information with this game, with the Chinese room developing it and their previous work and everything they've shown, I think the atmosphere is probably going to be incredible, and what remains to be seen is how well the rest of the game actually holds up, such as the story, its RPG mechanics, how fun each of the individual clans of vampire is to play, even though there's only a few of them, and I believe there was even word that this game is more like a spiritual successor to the first one than a sequel necessarily, so all that to say, there is plenty of reasons to have every red flag imaginable about this game, but I'm hoping it's good. But ultimately, the thing is, I've got to know how the story ends one way or another, the story around this game and it actually being released as a finished product finally after all these years and delays and whatnot. So if I'm being honest, whether it's actually good, bad, all that, it's irrelevant. I just have to know how this goes, basically. I'm too invested in the journey both for the actual game, but also everything surrounding it, which is why this game is topping my personal most anticipated game releases, because, quite frankly, you don't get to the last chapter of a book only to stop reading. But in all seriousness, though, I do hope it's good. World of Darkness has a history with, I would say, middling games, and I would really like to play one that I just truly enjoyed for once. That isn't just a visual novel. Last but not least, though, that brings us to my final entry of The Altars, a game I've talked about once or twice here and there. It's a bizarre sci-fi game from 11-bit studios that involves things like survival crafting, but mostly what I'm interested in here is just the unique elements of it. You see, you play as a man stuck on a planet that is supposed to be being harvested for resources, specifically a resource called Rapidium. Unfortunately, the landing doesn't go well and everyone dies except you, and in order to escape this planet, you have to actually make use of that special resource to make clones of yourself, your altars. These altars are going to be you, except they're going to vary by making little changes to what happened in your life so they can be their own person with their own skill sets and stuff in order to help you accomplish certain tasks. And the thing is, while that's fine in and of itself, what I've played of it, you actually get to interact with these altars and have to keep everybody on the ship happy, which is basically just you arguing with yourself, performing all these tasks on top of all the crafting and stuff, trying to simply survive so you can eventually, through doing all of this, get to a point where you can use your ship to actually leave the planet and not die. And it's just such a bizarre adventure that has so many cool elements to it. And while there are parts of it that I've absolutely seen elsewhere, it comes together to make a game kind of unlike anything I've ever played before. And if you've watched the channel and just seen all the reviews I've done, there comes a point where I'm just like super interested in anything that feels like something I haven't ever played before, and that's what The Altars feels like to me, which is why I am so interested in it and what it is doing on this list. So hopefully that manages to be a really cool experience, but it certainly looks unique one way or another, which certainly has my attention. But that, I think, is going to do it for this particular video, so it's probably as good a place as any to wrap it up. I certainly hope you enjoyed this look at my most anticipated upcoming games, though I would certainly love to hear about yours. yours, which naturally means to drop them down in the comment section below. And do remember to like and subscribe while you are at it. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.